2020, the task force published an online survey in order to obtain a baseline understanding of perceptions from the faith community. The survey was published in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Vietnamese. Respondents were invited to provide comments, express their concerns, or share recommendations. In total, 492 individuals responded to the survey. The faith community asked for the same things other stakeholders seek. They want to be heard, they want communications and transparency. They want the victims and survivors cared for, and that means all the victims or survivors. They want the diocese to put an end to this issue once and for all, and to begin to focus on creating a new culture that promotes a safe, secure environment for all of God's children, vulnerable adults, and the people who minister to them. The final stakeholder group was the clergy, who were offered the opportunity to be interviewed one-on-one by professional staff. Offering the clergy the opportunity to respond one-on-one through personal interviews proved to be a highly effective way to allow the members of the presbyterate to be heard and to experience being listened to. 65% of all priests who could be reached by phone were interviewed, and only 15% declined to be interviewed. The comments and recommendations of the clergy were, in many ways, consistent with the hope and concerns of the faith community, and in other ways quite different. The clergy have a unique view of the situation, as they have been directly impacted in ways beyond that of the general faith community. They see both positive signs for the future and repeated behaviors or reinforcement of all behaviors that keep the way it has always been, that means the status quo, in place. For most, it was the first time that anyone had asked the clergy about these issues or even talked with them about the situation. They want things to be better. They want these issues off the front pages of the papers. They want all parishes actively engaged in creating a new standard for protecting children and vulnerable adults. They want the diocese to create safe environments for all. Most importantly, on behalf of the task force, I want to sincerely thank and recognize the strength and resiliency of the survivors who participated in the focus groups run by Stop It Now. These courageous individuals helped us understand their pain, their trauma, the need for healing, and a path for going forward. We applaud the 492 community members who responded to our survey. They helped us understand the concerns and frustrations, including the importance of transparency, accountability, and timeliness of response in dealing with allegations of sexual abuse. We also want to thank all of the clergy who openly share the feelings of isolation, anxiety, and frustration with the Church's failed efforts to deal effectively with all dimensions of this devastating blow to their ministry. Informed by the voices of the stakeholders and key informants as critical action steps within the report strategic plan, the task force recommends the following 6 strategic initiatives and corresponding measurable objectives, which Irene will share with you now. Thank you. Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you, Orlando. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good
morning. So I'm going to go over the 6 strategic initiatives with the objectives that we developed. So the first strategic initiative is the diocese will acknowledge the trauma of sexual abuse of members of our community and ensure the allocation of resources needed to promote healing of survivors in the faith community. To do that, the task force recommends the following measurable objectives. A, the diocese will create a strong statement acknowledging the impact of sexual abuse by representatives of the Church and the failure of diocesan leadership to respond adequately to victim survivors, their families, and the faith community, in a trauma-informed and trauma-responsive manner. B, the diocese will provide transparency by publishing an annual report of the activities of the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance, by providing timely communications on all decisions relating to holding accountable all clergy credibly accused of sexually inappropriate actions, and by proactively promoting all policies, procedures, and guidelines on the diocesan website used to keep the faith community safe and any other public forum where this information will be presented to the community. C, the diocese will develop and implement a policy for the use of financial resources in support of survivors and in arriving at any mutual agreed upon settlements with victims. D, the diocese will, as a result of this report, review the organizational structure and budget of the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance to ensure adequate resources for the successful implementation of the task force recommendations. For the second strategic initiative, the diocese will respond to all allegations of sexual abuse in our child community in a timely, compassionate, and fair way. The task force recommends the following measurable objectives. A, the task force will reform the diocesan policies/procedures for addressing allegations of sexual abuse based on trauma-informed and trauma-responsive best practices. B, the task force will reform the review board's bylaws and procedures based on best practices in compliance to pertinent civil and canonical norms. C, the diocese will establish a protocol for timely and specific communication with a parish affected by any person in a ministerial role being put on administrative leave. For the third strategic initiative, the diocese will ensure a transparent system of protocols and procedures that guarantee respect and due process for all involved. The task force recommends the following measurable objectives. A, the bishop will appoint an advisory committee to work with the director and the staff of the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance to implement within the diocese the recommendations in the report and to ensure a system of continuous quality improvement is established to regularly review all policy/procedure programs to keep current with the best trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practice, and to prevent sexual abuse while promoting healing of everyone in our faith community, now and in the future. Such review shall measure success by assessing levels of trust, safety, and dignity among those impacted. B, the diocese will update its policies and procedures to meet current trauma-informed and trauma-responsive best practices, make it user-friendly, and develop a one-page bullet summary for distribution at the parish level. C, the diocese will develop a plan to regularly provide training at the parish level on the new policies and procedures. D, the diocese recognizes that some allegations of sexual abuse by those in ministry may not be credible. Therefore, the diocese will develop a policy/procure for protecting and restoring the reputation for anyone in ministry for whom, after a thoughtful and comprehensive investigation by civil authorities and assessment by the review board, allegations of sexual abuse have been found not to be credible. E, the diocese will make the services of an independent legal counsel available to the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance Administration. For the fourth strategic initiative, the diocese will ensure that the local church leadership is held responsible and accountable for failing to protect children and other vulnerable persons. The task force recommends the following measurable objectives. A, the diocese will develop a memorandum of understanding with each of the region's district attorneys to immediately refer anyone in ministry within the diocese accused of past or present abuse for possible criminal prosecution. B, the current and future bishops of Springfield, Massachusetts will reaffirm their commitment and maintain MOUs with each of the region's district attorneys. C, the diocese will develop a trauma-informed and trauma-responsive communication plan for both internal and external sharing of timely information to the affected parish and the larger community about abuse allegations and resulting decisions regarding offenders. D, the diocese will develop a pastoral outreach program for survivors, their families, the faith community, and families of the accused. For the fifth strategic initiative, the diocese will hold those who have been credibly accused of sexual abuse responsible and accountable. The task force recommends the following objectives. A, the diocese will review and update their code of conduct for clergy, administrators, staff, and volunteers. B, the diocese will create a policy/procedure and an administrative structure through the bishop with the review and oversight of the review board to hold anyone in ministry who fails to report past or present allegations of sexual abuse accountable. C, the review board will ensure the development of a safety plan, including behavioral health services, and regular review/monitor the plan with anyone who is credibly accused of sexual abuse. For the sixth and final strategic initiative, the diocese will establish programs designed to prevent sexual abuse of anyone in our faith communities in the future. The task force recommends the following measurable objectives. A, the diocese will establish programs designed to prevent sexual abuse and promote healing of anyone in our faith community in the future. B, education is the key to prevention. Therefore, the diocese will reintroduce and fully implement the Virtus program in each parish with the requirement that each member of the clergy, all religious, every staff member, and every volunteer who has regular contact with minors complete the Virtus training. C, the diocese will develop a team in each parish that includes interested volunteers, the pastor, and/or his designee, and the Safe Environment Team coordinators, formerly known as child advocates, to ensure the implementation of trauma-informed and trauma-responsive best practice of child sex abuse prevention. D, the diocese will provide the Safe Environment Team in each parish with a clear job description and specialized training. So the task force recognizes that there is a great deal of work ahead to implement the broad range of responses and proactive efforts to prevent future abuse. Adoption and implementation of these strategic initiatives and accepting these recommendations will provide a framework for accomplishing what has not been in place in the past. It will offer a way to work together at the parish and diocesan level to create a safe environment for all of God's children, and at the same time provide compassionate, supportive care to those who have been harmed in the past by abuse from individuals and from the diocese. Bishop Byrne has enthusiastically accepted our report and recommendations. We are grateful to him for the trust he has placed in us and for his conviction in making the necessary changes. In terms of next steps, the task force has recommended to Bishop Byrne that he appoint a committee to provide ongoing oversight of the plan's implementation. Bishop Byrne has accepted our recommendation, and we welcomed his invitation for the task force to remain in place until the committee has been appointed and is in place. The task force has now shifted its focus, and we will work to nominate a slate of candidates who are representative of the dioceses and in the broader Western Massachusetts community, rooted in lived experience, and who have acknowledged an expertise to help ensure that changes the strategic plan calls for. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene and Orlando, for your efforts, especially for co-chairing the task force these past months. And my thanks as well to the task force members for their dedication and commitment to this important work. And joining us this morning are Ron Johnson, our Father Michael Piers, Father William Trigny, Amber Zini, and the task force consultant Maurice Beauvert. It is critically important that this report and accompanying strategic plan was not a top-down initiative, but rather it was a grassroots effort, one that would not have been possible without the invaluable input the task force received from the various stakeholder groups. I want to especially thank, with my personal thanks, to the courageous clergy abuse survivor community for the substantively critical input they provided through the efforts organized by Stop It Now. As a faith community, we are indebted to these individuals for sharing their personal stories and insights, in many cases revisiting the pain they suffered. To them and to the community as a whole, I offer my assurance that this report is just the beginning. The work of the task force is critically important to turning our words of commitment to accountability and transparency into tangible action. It is my sincere hope that this will offer us a blueprint to once and for all set a course for real change in how we handle future allegations. So it is with a most grateful heart that I accept this report and strategic plan. Thank you again.
At this time, if you have any questions for Orlando or Irene or the bishop.
So where would you start with this? What would be the first steps that you think they should take? And I gather from this headline here, we're talking about a 3-year implementation for this, is that right?
Yes, yes. Some steps have already been taken. There is an MOU with all of the district attorney offices at the moment. So some things have already started to take place, but it is a 3-year plan. Jeff, do you want to speak to that more, or Orlando?
Well, in our conversations with the clergy yesterday, one of the priests actually insisted that it probably be better to impose a date, specific date on implementation, and I believe he suggested a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a very good suggestion. Working on deadlines is very helpful when implementing a strategic plan, and I think we will do so.
Perhaps maybe just to clarify, the first step is, of course, to set the steering committee, to make sure that we start the entire process, which has already begun, but we start it with oversight, clarity, and vision for the future. And so that's our very first step, is to make sure that that committee, in the meantime, while we are vetting those names and deciding who would be the best representatives from across Western Massachusetts, the task force has agreed to stay on to help us formulate that process. But that would be our first step towards then the implementation from there.
Bishop, what is, and the task force leaders, what was not right about the review board that it needs to be reformulated?
I think maybe perhaps the task force, Orlando or Irene, might be the best, since they were.
Well, I guess the most significant thing that I can point out to is that there was not a real tangible separation between the investigators and the review board. So one of the recommendations that we made is that those investigators, 2 of them attached to the review board, be absolutely autonomous from the review board until they finalize their investigation and actually report it to the board so they can make a decision.
Will there be any carryover in the members of the review board in your estimation?
Probably Jeff is better to speak about this, but the point, from the point of view of the task force, is that we thought it necessary to restructure the review board and provide a series of guidelines for the work that would be more consistent with our report.
Good morning. I've said this before and I'll say it again this morning. The sexual abuse of a child, regardless of when it happened, whether it happened last week, 10 years ago, or 50 years ago, is a crime, bottom line. And chief among the systemic and the structural changes that have been made truly under the stewardship of the task force is first and foremost to ensure that the diocese is upholding its responsibility to refer reports and allegations of sexual abuse to civil and prosecutorial authorities. So really, the origin is to make sure that civil and prosecutorial authorities have the opportunity, to receive, to review, and to take whatever the appropriate steps are within their respective jurisdictions. With respect to the review board, as Orlando said, a significant structural change, first and foremost, is the composition of the board. And within the bylaws that the task force has developed, first and foremost, there's a prescribed number of individuals. That number is 9. There is a stipulation that 5 of those persons be in full communion with the Catholic Church. That is a requirement of the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People that's established by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. In addition to that, and as Bishop Byrne has said, independence is so important, oversight is critical, and you cannot police yourself. And to ensure that there's a broad representation of the community, the bylaws also stipulate that there shall be 4 individuals from outside of the Catholic tradition. So truly broadening the scope of representativeness in terms of who is in the position, who are on the review board is a critical next step. And so with respect to seating the review board, that is a process that is ongoing, but structurally the membership of the review board will be changing from what it has been in the past.
Including the number of members?
There's now a prescribed number of members. That number is 9. In the past, the membership number was not defined.
So there still will be 9, no more than 9?
There will be 9 members
5 will be in communion?
with the Catholic Church, and 4 will be from outside
And will
of the
there
church.
be a change in the roster of that review board membership?
So by nature of changing the composition of the review board, that is going to necessitate some changes to the roster of the review board. Currently, a process that's underway, and as Bishop Byrne in Orlando and Irene mentioned this morning, part of the work of the task force, first and foremost at this point in time, is to make sure that they are recommending a slate for the steering committee, and under that will be part of the ongoing work of making sure that all of these measurable objectives are brought to fruition. Chief among them, from my perspective as the director of the office, will be implementing the reforms to the review board.
Can you address how the investigators will remain autonomous from the review board? How has that process changed from what is in place now?
A number of changes have taken place over the course of the task force's tenure, and one of those changes has been the hiring of a team of 4 investigators. Previously, 2 years ago, that was not the case. There was a single investigator, and in the course of the past 2 years, 4 additional individuals have come on board. These individuals, 3 have substantial law enforcement backgrounds, experience in forensic interviewing, and also a child abuse investigator. And so over the course of the past 2 years, the Diocese and the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance, really under the stewardship of the task force's vision, has worked to make sure that the investigations that are being done, first and foremost, are in accordance with the Memorandum of Understanding with the district attorneys, so to make sure that any fact-finding that's conducted by the investigation is done only when we are cleared to do so in accordance with the MOU. Secondly, the investigators complete their investigation before it is submitted to the review board, and the investigators themselves are not present in attending those meetings. They are available for consultation on an as-needed basis, but it's not an integrated process.
So the review board doesn't direct the investigation.
They
only get the results.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Firstly, I wanted to ask about the timeline for the diocese providing transparency by publishing the annual can any updates to that list from here on out only be made available on an annual basis to people?
When Bishop Byrne and in the diocese released the list and the updated list of persons whom have been credibly accused of sexual abuse of minors in their ministry within the Diocese of Springfield, one of the commitments was to ensure that that list is a living document, right? Research tells us, and we know through lived experience, that far too often individuals who have been victimized and who have experienced sexual abuse internalize and cope silently with the pain of sexual abuse. And one of the tenets behind releasing the list is to ensure that the diocese provides information that may be helpful to someone in their own decision and discernment to disclose. Disclosure is an important part of the process of seeking services and seeking assistance. And so whether that be to a therapist, a family member, whether that be directly to law enforcement themselves, it was absolutely critical for the diocese and for Bishop Byrne that we provide information that may be helpful in someone's discernment. And so that list will continue to be a living document. Updates will be made contemporaneously, and on a regular basis, public announcements will be made to provide a full accounting of the additions that have been made over a period of time.
Have there been any updates to that list since June?
There has been one addition to the list this past week.
And who was that?
On the 1st of September, Father Menji was added to the list.
Bishop, what would you say to people that are looking at these recommendations and are still maybe a little skeptical that they're actually going to be implemented or followed through with?
Well, that was the entire point of having an independent task force, that this wasn't directed by me, it was encouraged by me, but it was intended to be independent, so that the recommendations be brought to me, but not dreamed up by me or anyone on the staff. And then the creation of an independent steering committee that would give us the annual report, but keep the ongoing work done, is to say that no organization should police itself, and the process of taking this and bringing it to an independent committee of people to ensure that we're doing the work that we've said we do is important. And so I understand that people might be skeptical, but we really see this as a new day in the work of transparency and in the hard work of making sure that we acknowledge, we bring healing, we bring justice into the work that we do.
So it's the job of the steering committee to ensure that these are implemented?
Right, and then and also ultimately it's all of our job in the sense that the church is not just me. The beauty of this entire process was an acknowledgement that the Holy Spirit speaks to everybody, and that if we can encourage people from the grassroots up to speak their hearts and their experience and what they feel needs to be done. And so our capacity to not go from top down, but to speak to survivors, victim survivors, to speak to the whole community, to those in 4 different languages that wish to speak up, and to hear the stakeholders of our clergy who have been affected by this also, was our way of opening up the windows and allowing the voices to be heard so that we could develop something that truly was reflective of lived experience and helped us hear how we believe God was calling us. So the process of moving it out of a centralized administrative under the bishop gives us that capacity for it to remain an independent process and a voice so that we can move forward. Larry.
Sir, I hope you don't think I'm belaboring this, but I see reference to an advisory committee on point number 3 here in this summary. You refer to a steering committee.
Yeah, I apologize. So we've been using several different languages, but that's, in my mind, steering,
Is it the same?
it's the same, yeah. So in my mind, advisory sounds like somebody sitting in the back seat versus somebody driving the car who's helping us drive. So we've used those terms, interchangeably, but I'll stick to advisory committee since that's what's on the.
But if it's an advisory committee, how independent is it? In that their advice would still come to you, and that you would be the decision maker on recommended changes?
Right, but it would be a decision maker based on the public recommendations. It's not a decision maker based on backroom conversations, but actually on a public discussion, intentionally made to be out into the open, so that ultimately I would be making the final decisions. But like we see in the success of this task force and how well they worked, independence does not mean, it also can imply collaboration. And that's what we see this as, a collaborative effort to make sure that, that all people are kept safe, that the work of building trust within Western Massachusetts continues. So independent also means collaborative in my mind.
Can I just add something?
Yes.
about the advice? Thank you. Sorry, Bishop.
So, having been on the task force for almost 2 years, the way I see the advisory working is that we'll have a group of people that will meet regularly to review, are these objectives being met? And as we review those, we put together an annual report which will go back to the bishop or to Jeff and to the public saying, this is what was accomplished and this isn't what was accomplished. So I see there really is a check and balance system in there. And it will be done, by people from the community that have been chosen to serve on the advisory committee. I don't know if that's helpful.
It is.
Okay.
There's reference to this desire to create a strong statement. What's the timeline on that, or do you consider this to be your strong statement?
No, I don't consider this to be my strong statement and the strong statement of the Church of Springfield. So now that the recommendations have been complete, then that will be forthcoming. So I have been praying about that and beginning to think the format in which that would be most appropriate, but that will be forthcoming.
And just in terms of time, would you speak to the reference to a 3-year rollout here? And do you think that might be heard by community members and parishioners as a slow response?
Well, one of the things is there's a strategic plan element, and for anyone who's ever done a strategic plan, you have to take steps and make sure that you're doing what you're doing correctly. So it's not to say that we're putting off important work. We're trying to do this systematically. What we're talking about is an entire reformation of a systematic reformation of how we deal with victim survivors, how the review board is going to function most effectively, the establishment of a steering committee. So if you we want to, instead of trying to do everything at once, just as in any strategic plan, you're going to take your top priorities and work them while at the same time continuing along, making sure that the benchmarks are being met along the way.
And what do you see as those top priorities?
Well, I think that's going to be determined. I mean, of course, there are certain things, but that's why we are going to have the advisory committee so that they can determine what they see as, this is what needs to be done first, this is what needs to be done second. Again, it's important to recognize that much of the work doesn't need, some of the work does not need, we didn't need an advisory committee to tell us to have an MOU. The work, the memorandum of understanding with the district attorneys was the right thing to do to make sure that crimes are being reported, that the work that what is responsible to the civil authorities are notified, and we are working closely and I think effectively with the 3 district attorneys. So I'm grateful also to them for the assistance in the work and the collaboration that we've been able to have with them.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm representative of the Catholic Media District. I just wanted to ask you what you would say to Catholics who still may be estranged by this issue. And of course, we always want to reach out to them. I mean, it has such a danger effect.
Right.
People say.
So the question is what do you say to people who have left the church or fallen from the practice of their faith? And I think from a biblical perspective, it's that I think it's important not to walk away from Peter just because of Judas. Judas was the one who betrayed Christ, and we reel from this experience of Judas's throughout our history. And our history here in Western Massachusetts. But because of that, we shouldn't walk away from Christ himself and from the church, that's where healing comes. And I ask them to step back so that they can be a living part of a healing church. And that's my invitation to them. We seek to be the healing hands of Christ in the world, and I need them to help me do that.
Do you think that the church should announce when names are added to the list of credibly accused, rather than just insert the name?
Sure. I mean, I think that as opposed to inserting the name as if it were, because it was not intended to be just slide one under the door. So I think that's a good suggestion that we let there be a public notification that there be some. Yes?
When was the last time the code of conduct for clergy, administrators, staff, and volunteers was updated?
I believe it was 2016, is that correct? 2016.
What changes to that do you envision making now under 25?
I think Jeff maybe would be better to speak to that, or Irene.
I think Jeff, I'm not sure.
So as I take off my mask to answer the question, kind of what has changed since 2016 and what revisions and modifications are needed to a code of conduct, I'm struck by the fact that I'm holding a mask. And certainly the way that we have continued to interact as a society over the course of the past year and a half with the coronavirus pandemic has really changed the way that we interact, especially with spending more time in online communities through different electronic formats of communication. And so it's important that our expectations in our code of conduct is contemporaneous and it reflects those different ways that we are ministering and interacting with children and young people. And so certainly among the changes that would be anticipated to a code of conduct revision would be to make sure that best practices are being followed in terms of those who are working and ministering on behalf of the church through these different mediums, many of which that are necessitated kind of by our current circumstances with the pandemic.
All set? Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. Did you have another question? You're all set? Great. Thank you so much for joining us.